What Elvis did was brand new. I don't mean his music. There's been plenty said about that. I mean his life, the great tragic rock and roll story. Today it's a cliché, the rock star who comes from nowhere, gets famous, burns out on drugs, dies young. Jim Morrison, Kurt Cobain. But when Elvis did it, it wasn't a cliché. It hadn't happened before. He was just living his life, making the best choices he could. As it happened, he was unprepared to make those choices in one way or another. Youth culture was new then. Before all this, one's youth was seen as an apprenticeship for adulthood. The early rock bands wore suits on stage, because if you wanted respect, you had to look like a grown-up. There was a uniform. When youth culture blew up in everyone's face, being young suddenly became a distinct phase of life. The ripples from Elvis's influence spread and multiplied and inspired a million teenagers to pick up a guitar and sing Hound Dog in the mirror. And some of those teenagers started bands, and some of those bands got big. And the new music they made was whatever poured out of their confused 19-year-old heads after Elvis had been rolling around in there, grinding rocks into sand for a few years. Some of them invented punk. Some of them invented acid rock. Some of them invented the iPod. When Kiss got up on stage in those crazy outfits, they were the descendants of Elvis and his famous capes. Elvis may not have been consciously aware of all this. There had never been such wild, youth-only fandom before he came along, not even for Paganini, and he may not have been able to assimilate the massive cultural shift that was taking place. Societal changes that occur during one's lifetime are always hard to put into perspective. These changes took place as he himself matured. It's hard for a 30-year-old to look back and see how the world has changed since he was 20, because he has changed so much too. Sure, it looks different, but how much of that is because he's got different eyes now? And it must be 1,000 times more difficult when one has gone in that 10 years from being a truck driver in Memphis to a music superstar, Hollywood actor, and honorably discharged veteran. And when the changes are as unprecedented and vast as the gap between youth culture and mainstream culture. It always bothers me when people make fun of Elvis. I feel protective of him. I feel like the jokers don't understand him. He was just one little guy who went out for a swim and got caught on top of a tidal wave. There were no guidelines back then, no cautionary tales. No one had ever been in his position before. He did the best he could. I'm 35 years old, and I've done a lot in my life. And after all of it, I've barely learned enough to realize that I don't know shit. I doubt strongly that I'll know much more in 7 years, when I'm 42. Elvis died at 42. He spent the last 23 years of his life walking brand new ground where no one had ever walked. Sure, he made errors, some of taste, some of judgment, but he was out there in new territory. He was the singing canary we sent into the coal mine, and when the singing stopped, we learned that it was dangerous in there.